Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, students, friends, family, anyone on the internet, welcome to episode 81 of the Teacher Emilio Podcast. I'm your host, Emilio. Today, I've brought someone that I've met again in Japan. I'll let him introduce himself in just a sec. But today's topic is going to uni, quote unquote, old. Now, let's welcome my friend Piers. Piers, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Look, Piers, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the topic.
All right, my name is Piers. I'm 26, which is ancient in the world of undergraduate university. Want to be video producer. I do international studies at RMIT, and I work in healthcare.
Awesome.
I'm a little bit of a travel enjoyer, so we actually met. We met at Taiwan International Airport.
That's right. Right in the middle or like before we started our trip. And for a second, I thought we wouldn't meet. So it was pretty cool catching up, meeting in Taiwan.
Yeah, it was quite nice. To be honest, it was a very nice experience for me because the line in customs at that airport sort of snakes around a little bit. And I looked up from my phone, and this man was standing in front of me. And he's like, Piers. And I'm like, oh, I'm 10 hours away from home, and Emilio's here. That's awesome. And then we both sort of had arranged to go to Japan a little bit early. And then we ended up spending, 4 days just hanging out.
I know, how cool.
It was a very nice experience.
And, luckily, it was one of those experiences when you catch up with someone and we had so many things in common. And then I remember during the trip telling you, hey, when we go back, it would be pretty cool if we record an episode. I don't know what it's going to be about, but I have to bring you to the podcast and you're here. So thank you, bro. It's pretty cool that we're recording.
Yeah, thank you very much. Like I said, very happy to be here.
Now, getting into today's topic, as you know, going back to uni, being older. So you said that you are a bit old for an undergraduate degree. What makes you think that?
I think that, you look around at classes in like an undergraduate first year program, and there's a lot of 18-year-olds, a lot of 19-year-olds, a lot of people who are like fresh out of high school. And like technically, I'm well and truly a mature age student at age 26. I was 25 when I started, but being 26 is definitely on the older side. There are obviously people older than me who are starting uni for the first time, and there are people who like change careers or change degrees or go back to uni like well into adulthood. So like it's never too late to start. But I definitely had like a little bit of like apprehension about going back to school.
And is it because you would be like the older one, or because it would be as in maybe you wouldn't fit, or?
Yeah, it's a weird dynamic sometimes. Like, I'm sure you can relate, given our recent trip. Sometimes you're hanging out with someone like a little bit younger, and you're like, oh wow, like there really is like a big difference between the two of us. Like it's almost like a cultural difference at some point.
True, so true. Lots of examples come to mind, but maybe I'll start with this one. I remember once we were in Japan, one of the most famous shops in Japan. In case you guys don't know, it's called Don Quixote. It's a mix of Target, Kmart, JB Hi-Fi, what else? Kohl's. It's
pretty much the store where you can buy anything. Like whatever your heart desires, you will find it at Don Quixote.
And it's funny because we would be, in a small group, and some of the guys would be like, oh, I want to check out the Pokemon figures or the anime figures, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, let me get a suitcase. And then one of the guys is like, Emilio-san, why do you need a suitcase? And I was like, bro, I don't know. 2 weeks ago, I was 20 like you. And now look at me, I'm looking for a suitcase. So it's different. I definitely agree. And the same thing with like food choices, or when you go and pick something interesting.
You've become a little bit more like health conscious. You blink and suddenly you're excited for socks at Christmas instead of like a really fun, exciting gift.
No, true. And the other thing would be like, say for example, if we went out and someone would get like ice cream. So not as just ice cream or instant noodles or anything along those lines, but some of those choices that I did when I was younger, and I was like, oh man, if I eat that, maybe I'm gonna have a stomachache. Things that I wouldn't never have thought back when I was like 20, 22, and then and now I'm 30. So it's that time where I gotta be careful with what I eat and this and that.
I think it's good that most people sort of recognize that at some point. Like everyone like grows up eventually, and they're like, oh, okay, I guess I gotta look after myself a little bit more. Like maybe I'll drink a little bit less, or I'll eat a little bit more healthy, or I'll try and lose some weight like before I turn 30, that sort of thing.
No, of course.
It's a difficult decision to make. it comes for all of us.
And talking about difficult decisions, I mean, after I finished my undergrad, I noticed that, now that I'm 30, I've noticed that a lot of people around me either have got a master's degree or some of them thought of getting a master's. And I thought, look, let me just go for it and give it a try. Maybe that will be a good way to level up, maybe improve in different areas. So I enrolled in this course. But a part of me thought, maybe I could just keep going as I'm doing. I mean, I could just continue with my teaching. I could continue with this.
Continue with the content, with the podcast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, eventually, who knows? I'm going to get 100,000 subscribers plus.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you make sure you leave me a review on Spotify, if you're listening on Spotify, or make sure you like, subscribe, all of that. Please make sure you do all of it. It takes a second.
It's important, and that's a really good call to action.
And thank you. And the funny thing is that I thought, I mean, a master's degree, 2 years, and I guess the same thing could be said. I mean, I don't know how was your situation. I'll ask you about that in a sec. But that really got me thinking. I guess the difference is that with that course, I mean, the age range is much bigger. So you could get students that are just fresh from their undergrad, anywhere between, 22, 24 to like all the way up to 40 or more. But yeah, it's been different going back to uni. How was it? How was your experience? I mean, what made you go into this undergrad degree?
To be honest, I think I realized like a couple of years ago that I was ready. And then there was this big global pandemic event happening at the time. And I said, maybe it's not the right time to go to uni. So like I could have been doing uni as like a 22, 23-year-old. But instead it got pushed back a little bit due to situations that it's not like it was like outside of my control. Like I still could have enrolled in uni at that time, but I decided I didn't really want to do like online learning or anything like that. So I actually did a TAFE course during the pandemic because it was like free. The government paid for it. And that was like a really nice way to like dip my toes into like higher education. I actually did it here at RMIT, and I really enjoyed the experience for the most part. But I think it was like the right call to not start an actual degree during the pandemic, just because it was like not the most pleasant experience. Like doing uni from home, like people doing it from their bedroom, people like being in a video call, not turning the camera on. It's just like not the most like healthy environment for like trying to take something seriously. So I ended up waiting a little bit longer. And now that I'm here, like obviously it's early days. I'm still, at the beginning of my uni journey really, but it was kind of like, in many ways it was a lot easier than I thought it would be. And in many ways it was also like a little bit more challenging than I thought it would be. Because honestly, like to tell you the truth, I always kind of wanted to go to uni. And to tell you the truth, like more specifically, I probably always wanted to study something similar to what I'm studying now. And that's like international studies, which is very interesting, I think. But also like I'm doing Japanese again. And like I took Japanese in high school for a few years and I really loved it. And then like I had like a big break because I was like, right now maybe like uni's not for me. I don't really want to like pursue any like study or anything like that. And now that I'm back, it's like, like this is what I was meant to be doing all along. And it's like, it's kind of strange to look back on because it's like, like I could have like followed this path like a long time ago and I'd be in a very different position to where I am now. But at the same time, it's like, I had a really good like break between like school and uni and I don't really regret my like decision or anything like that. So I feel quite like secure and confident in my decision right now, which is good.
Well, that's awesome. Look, you packed so much in that answer. So one of the things that I would like to mention that I think it's pretty cool is how you've got this concept of waiting, giving yourself time, because we live in an era of, times where everything is so quick. Like you finish watching a series on Netflix, you listen to the previous podcast of Teacher Emilio, you're like, where's the next one? And everything has to be on the spot, right? But then going against that and just being, look, I'm just going to wait. I don't want to do this now. And, despite being at home the whole day, I think it's a pretty, tough move that not many people would do. And the one other thing that I wanted to ask, I mean, you said that you always thought of going to uni. As you know, Australia is an amazing country, and I always tell my friends back home, and I used to tell my friends because people would be like, what happens if you fail? What happens if uni is too hard or whatever? What if you don't adapt? And I was like, mate, if I don't adapt, I'll just work in Macca's my whole life. And I'll have a decent living. I don't need to depend on my parents or, whatever happens to the economy, I could rent a place and live on my own. Obviously, once I got here, I thought, okay, I don't want to just work on Macca's my whole life. But I think that's a good analogy just to say how good of a country Australia is compared to, you know, everywhere in the planet.
Yeah.
So my follow-up question would be, I mean, I assume you were working. So
Yes.
what made you think of going back to uni? Because technically speaking, I mean, I don't want to say it this way, but technically you don't have to.
That's true.
You could just continue doing whatever you were doing. And then, you know, like I said, you may not have, I mean, I think it really depends on the situation, but all in all, you could have a very good life where you're going to have a salary, but, you know, it's not like in other countries. Like if you live in South America and you haven't got a degree, it's like, mate, good luck. You need to be killing it on this, or you need to have like 4 side hustles. It's just crazy. Or you need to be rich. It's not something that you can just afford to say. Whereas in Australia, you could be like, you know what, I don't want to do uni. I want to do whatever I'm doing at the moment, and I know I'm going to be okay.
Yeah, right.
So what made you eventually do the shift? Or I don't know, or tell us a bit about your experience.
So when I left school, like I said, I wasn't really in the mindset where I was looking to pursue further study. To be completely honest, I was a little bit like scared to some degree, or maybe like anxious or apprehensive, or maybe like I thought like I would really struggle, or like I wouldn't be able to accomplish it. So there's this sort of like insecurity behind some of my decision. But then what I ended up doing is like I worked retail and then hospitality and like a whole bunch of different jobs in those fields, which had its moments. Like it was certainly really fun. I think that everyone should work hospitality or customer service at some point. Like this is a little sidebar. I have a little rule. Like actually, it's like I'm constantly workshopping this. I think by your mid-20s, you should have worked customer service for 2 years. You should have like a tattoo you kind of regret. You should have joined like a kind of lame sports team of some kind. You know, just like little experiences. You should have gone abroad. You should definitely try and travel abroad if you can. All these things that I think they're little, but they really shape who you are. And like once you've done them, it really like gives you more perspective. So working retail, hospitality, customer service is definitely one of these things where you just get like a completely different view on the world. Like you're interacting with people that you might never actually like get to know like organically outside of this environment. And it's like people you work with and like customers or clients or anything like that. And when I started, I was like, well, I don't want to go to uni, so I guess I'll do this and this will be fine. And then I sort of got this this itch that needed to be scratched. Like I worked my first job when I finished school. I did it for about a year. And that was like my gap year. It was like my gap year because I was like, oh, I'm going to go to uni after this. But then at the end of that year, I quit my job and I traveled around for 4 months. So I went to America and I went to Japan for maybe like 4.5 months in total. Like just purely traveling. Because I was still kind of like, well, I'm not 100% sure if studying is for me. But I don't really want to keep doing what I was doing, like that particular job. And then I just like did that cycle a few times. Like I fell in love with that immediately. I was like, oh wait, you can just live your life like that. Like you can just have a job, save up some money, travel, have really cool experiences, see cool parts of the world, meet cool people. And like if that's the life that you want to live, then that's really cool. And like you should absolutely do that. Another little like sidebar, if you have like a hobby that lets you, or if you have a hobby that's enriched by traveling, it's really cool. So like you could be like a musician, or you could, for me, this is kind of dorky. I used to play Super Smash Bros. And I used to go to Super Smash Bros. Tournaments. And I actually got to go to tournaments like in America and in Japan. And I traveled around like across the world, going to tournaments and meeting people and instantly having friends. Like I could be at like a random event in like Osaka or Los Angeles, and I would like walk in and I could just talk to people and I would immediately have friends. And it's like, that's sick. Like I got to stay at people's houses. I was like, hey, I'm like traveling from Australia. Like any chance I could like crash for the weekend, like while this event's on? And it's like, oh, that's a really like cool, like organic, natural way to like have connections across the world. So that was really cool. And that's sort of like what I was doing for a little while there. And then my decision to go back to uni, to go back to the original question, was like, that was really fun, but I wanted more satisfaction out of the day-to-day because I was sort of living for my like fun experiences. So I was like, I'm going to work a job that's kind of crappy in some ways so that I can save up and so I can have a really cool experience. And I said, I want more satisfaction like day to day. And I think the best way for me personally was like, well, if I study or if I get like a more, I guess, meaningful job, then I can increase the day-to-day quality of life. So that's how I've ended up where I'm at. And something that you said actually sort of piqued my interest.
Tell us.
In South America or in certain South American countries, do you think getting a degree is like a ticket like to a better life?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I would argue that, I mean, like I said, it's not necessary. I mean, it's not like you really have to have it, but it would be sort of a cultural thing as well. It's like, oh, which uni did you go to? It's so natural to ask that question. And at least, for example, in Venezuela, and I suppose it is the same in so many other countries. It is, and we could argue that it's the same thing in Australia, right? I mean, we're right now in Melbourne, and if I tell someone, oh, I've got, for example, an honours degree, honours is like after your bachelor. If I say, oh, I've got an honours degree from Melbourne Uni, I would argue that most people in the street would be like, oh, wow, ooh. Yeah, so you would get that, right? And the same thing would happen back home. The other thing is that if you don't have a degree, you would need to really sort of have something underneath your belt to back it up. And I mean, I suppose social media could be a good example. I mean, you could be, for example, killing it on TikTok, or you may be killing it on Instagram, YouTube. And if you go, look, I didn't go to uni, but I've got 500,000 subscribers or followers, whatever, and I make a good living, and I don't know, I can take care of my family. I don't know. I guess in that sense, it would be more acceptable, but definitely getting into companies. I mean, despite me not looking for work there, I would assume that it's a no-no. For example, some of my friends who've graduated from like the Monash and Melbourne Uni of Venezuela in Caracas, I mean, some of them have got really good positions, and it's not only because of the hard work, but it's also because they've got that. And I think that element is so big in the culture. I mean, like I said, you could do well without it, but it's just such a big plus.
Yeah.
It's almost like, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, right.
And at the same time, like, for example, in Venezuela, look, Venezuela is so tricky because it's changed so much. But I'll just put it this way. You could, I mean, assuming that we finished high school, right? Right now, 2023, I could work, or we could work in a bar or anywhere basically, and our salary would be, I don't know, let's say 250 US. Other Venezuelans, don't kill me. Look, I'm not, don't quote me on this, but imagine 250 US per month, max. And this is like working, no, maybe less. But anyways, imagine that, 150 to 250 US, maybe less. Or you could go to uni to hope to get maybe, I don't know, double that or a bit more. So it's like you gain so much. And also social recognition, because in South America it's so big to say, I am an accountant, or I'm a doctor, or I'm a lawyer. Or for example, that friend that I just told you that did really well, he's an engineer. So he will be like, I'm an engineer. Not that everyone always uses that, but it is definitely something that is really, I mean, it's quite powerful, I would say, because it's not the same driving a car from, I don't know, 1995 versus like a Tesla.
Yeah, right.
So I guess that you could have that Tesla effect if you've got a degree with a good uni, and same thing that would be with a master's and so on and so forth. So that's a very good point.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it sounds very interesting. Not like hugely dissimilar, but there are definitely some differences, like to Australia, right?
And for example, I noticed that because when I came to Australia, I was 18, and I would meet other people from Venezuela and other parts of South America. And for them, it was a shock because they would tell me, in my country, I was a manager. Do you know what I mean? Or I used to be for example, I used to be one of the managers for, I don't know, Coles back home. Like the second or like the biggest supermarket in the country. I was like the supply chain manager. And now I'm a cleaner, or now I am this, or now I'm that. And so for us, like having that label is so big. So you go from being at the top of the top of the top of the list to then, being like the worst, to build yourself up. So yeah, that's really tough. And I remember when I was younger, part of me thought, oh, I mean, it's not that bad. I mean, obviously, yeah, cleaning sucks. I mean, I don't like it. But then a part of me thought, I mean, it is what it is. This is what I've got to do. And for me, it was the opposite, because I didn't come from the top. I was like at the very, very bottom. So, I mean, it can't get... And this is something that an old man said. Well, not old man. Ooh, sorry. Especially if he's watching. But he would have been like, I don't know, maybe like my dad. But yeah, he said to me, look, son, or look, Emilio, you're now doing cleaning, but you're getting your degree. It can't get worse than this. So from here, you're just going to go up. It's going to get better. So that was a really good mindset. Whereas for other people, it would be like, I had all these nice things, and now I'm a cleaner, or now I'm customer service, or now I'm a barista. There's nothing wrong with being a barista, but I guess it could be a big shift for
Yeah.
some people.
Yeah, for sure. That's really interesting. We see that a lot in healthcare, actually.
Oh, how come?
Where people will migrate to Australia in search of whatever people migrate to Australia for, and they'll be like a qualified like practitioner. Like they'll have like a master's degree back home. They'll be like a physiotherapist or an exercise scientist or whatever, and then they come here and their qualifications aren't recognized. And maybe they qualified for a work visa, but not for the job that they were doing back home. So they've gone from like this kind of well-respected position, and then they come to Australia, and they have to become like an assistant or like a hospital orderly or something that's not quite as prestigious, I guess. And it's in many ways, I think it's really sad that like these people's qualifications and like maybe more importantly, their experience isn't being recognized. Because if you were working as like a physio for 10 years overseas and then you come here and we're like, oh, actually, you're not allowed to do that anymore. Like you don't have the qualification. That's a pretty bad feeling. Yeah.
And that's also a good reason to, to study, because regardless of whatever you've got, I mean, in Australia it's so big to have your Cert 3 in this or your Cert 4 or your diploma of this, or maybe you've got a degree but you need to study a bit more to then get the other degree to compensate it. Interesting.
Yeah.
And you said now that you like your course. I really like that you mentioned that. Coming back to going to uni, I think it's pretty cool that you say this, because I suppose that we could argue that the one benefit or one of the biggest pluses of taking your time rather than just rushing into uni, which is again what most people do, I don't feel there's nothing necessarily or like inherently wrong with that. But for example, in my case, I wanted to study like Japanese or languages, right? My case is a bit different because I couldn't change my degree and I could only study accounting and finance. And at the time, I didn't have any electives, and that's okay. Well, look at me now. Now I'm teaching English, and I had friends and people telling me, this is a good example of culture, because I had people telling me, oh, you're wasting your degree. Why would you do that, man? You're a walking Excel spreadsheet, blah, blah, blah. And now you're going to teach English? What, are you crazy? Blah, blah, blah. So that's an interesting cultural bit. But yeah, all this to say that it's interesting that you say this, because, I mean, not that I didn't enjoy accounting or finance. I liked it. But I suppose that lots of people would study something and then eventually change or maybe do something different. And I suppose if you take your time, maybe we would minimize the risk, if that's even a risk of that from happening, maybe.
Yeah, I think you're certainly right. There's also like that decision that basically everyone makes when they like enroll in university, and like they have to weigh up, do I want to do like a more fun degree, or do I want something that's going to lead to like a better paying job in the end? And it sort of depends like what your goals are, like what your career goals, whether you want to make a lot of money, that sort of thing. But I completely agree that if you take the time before you start, then you end up with like a bit more of like a measured decision in the end. So like I said, I feel like I've ended up doing something pretty similar to maybe what I would have done if I just went to uni straight out of high school. But I have so much more perspective. Like, for example, I did like a pretty basic economics, politics class. And I'm hanging out with all these first years. And like, we're talking about like capitalism and like, like how it exploits people. And it's like all stuff that's like, it's important. It's really important to discuss this. And we discuss like socialism, like is socialism good or bad? Different forms of like economic systems, all this stuff, not just capitalism. But it's like, if I was 18, fresh out of high school, and I was being asked to think about this stuff, I don't think I would have engaged with it on like a meaningful level. But like being a little bit older, having been in the workforce for a while, having like traveled to other parts of the world, I like had this like perspective. And I was like, oh, like these are the opinions that I'm forming based on like my lived experience in combination with my studies, rather than just being like, all right, I'm 18. I've just been like told what to think for 12 years of school, and now I'm going to go to uni and like kind of, I'll have information in front of me, and then it's like, do critical thinking, like here's your challenge, critically think about this. As an 18-year-old, that seems really, really challenging, but like with a little bit more perspective, I think it's like possible to actually have like really informed decisions. And as a result, I feel like I'm getting a lot out of like what I'm learning in class now.
That's awesome. And, I like that bit. And quick stop. I have to say that if anyone says like that, what is it called? That like socialism is good, tell them to come to the podcast. Tell them to get in touch with me. I'll give them a free plane ticket to Venezuela. They'll go there for a year, and then when they come back, we'll see what they say.
Right on.
Free rent. But you're right. It's interesting because definitely you experience things in a different way. And this is not necessarily with uni or with school, but this reminded me of my first time in Japan. I had the chance to go on my undergrad for 1 semester, and I really like the funny thing. I like the rice in Japan in general. It's very sticky, right? So when you've got the rice bowls called onigiri, it's very, very sticky. I don't know, and it's got a good texture. But I feel it's like it's a hit and miss. Some people love it. I mean, obviously Japanese people, most of them, if not everyone, loves it. But if you're a foreigner, it's like 50-50. Some people love it. All good, all good. Some people love it. Some people hate it. And for example, with my culture, when I came back from that trip, I would be like, oh, I want to buy that sticky rice. And friends and family would be like, oh, so now you're trying to be Japanese or whatever. But it would be like, oh, that's not how we eat rice, or that's not how we cook rice. And a part of me is like, I know, but it was so good. And then you just try to pick. And I think that when you say perspective, and you can just get so much from all these different experiences. I mean, ideally, traveling would be great. Maybe this may not this may not apply to everyone, but still, I mean, if you have the opportunity to maybe go to a different city or try something different, or I would extend it to, what is it called? Like push your comfort zone, or like go out of your comfort zone, and so many different experiences would happen.
Yeah, I think that's where like the most personal growth happens. Like you're pushing your comfort zone, you're pushing your limits, and like it doesn't have to be going to the other side of the world. So I grew up in Canberra, which is like still a city, but it's like a bit smaller of a city compared to, you know, the big cities of the world, or compared to Sydney and Melbourne. And it's like I probably learnt more moving to Melbourne than I did like traveling to any other country. Like moving to a bigger city was like a big change for me, or like beginning to work full time. Like that was a massive learning experience for me. And it's like you don't need to. Obviously, like having a job is still like a privilege to some degree, but you don't need to, shell out $1,500 for flights to the other side of the world in order to like actually have this perspective. Like you can find perspective in all corners of the world, in all corners of your life, if you're like looking for it and you're open to new experiences.
You know, thinking about perspective, now I want to touch upon, the age coming back to uni. I've noticed that in our school trip, or like the study tour, I noticed, I'm putting myself on the spot now. I noticed that a few times I would be telling other students, obviously younger than me, I would be saying this phrase, this is my grandpa moment. That's what I used to say. I would be like, when I was your age, blah, 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 blah. And you're right, because that definitely gives perspective too. Like as you get older, going back to uni, it was so different compared fresh out of high school versus having a bit of work experience and then going back to uni. Did you have any grandpa moments during the trip?
I had probably a couple, and I can probably speak on them. But something that I noticed was, even though I was a little bit older than a lot of the people we were traveling with, not everyone, wasn't the oldest.
Thank you.
Even though maybe I had more experience in like certain aspects of my life as a result of my age, that didn't necessarily translate to like everything. So I wasn't like going to be like dishing out advice like constantly, right? And I think like the best example of that is we were in Japan speaking Japanese, and like there were people much younger than me who were much better than me at Japanese. So like we had like a really good like exchange. And the same goes for the Japanese students, actually. Like a lot of them were a bit younger than me, but their English was considerably better than my Japanese. So there'd be like constant learning experiences for me, regardless of who I was talking to or regardless of how old they were. So like I could be talking to someone who's like 6 or 7 years younger than me, and they can like help me understand something. And that was like it was really nice. It felt really supportive the whole trip, to be honest. So like, maybe I'd have a grandpa moment here and there, and I'd be like, oh yeah, I remember doing that when I was 19. But then the same 19-year-old could explain something to me in Japanese, or explain like a cultural thing to me. And that was like a really, really, like that was more meaningful than whatever I had to say. Like the things I learnt from these people, regardless of their age, was like more meaningful to me than like any like wisdom I might be able to impart on them. I did have one one moment, and I will share this. I'm not going to name names just in case she watches this. One of the people that we traveled with, before we left, we had like a little meeting, like all of the students coming from Australia to Japan. And she made an offhand comment on how she wasn't old enough to drink yet in Japan, which means that at the time she was 19. And her birthday was actually, in the middle of the trip. And when she said that, we had never spoken. We were still in Australia, we'd never spoken. And I thought to myself, I'm never going to speak to this person. Like this person is clearly, they're 19. I don't want to hang out with a 19-year-old. And we get to Japan and we started talking and it was fine. And I was I was really prejudiced, based on someone's age. And that was really silly of me because it's I can actually still have a really good time, talking to and hanging out with this person. So that was good.
It's interesting you just mentioned that. I'm going to touch up on what you said earlier because I had not reverse, but something slightly different. But it's interesting you say this because for me, when that happened, first of all, I didn't tell anyone my age because, and I was always clean shaven, or very close to clean shaven. And I, thanks God, or Buddha, whatever you believe in, that I don't look my age. But some people in the trip said that to me, yeah, so, which is a good compliment.
I got that as well. It's
there
very
you go.
nice. It made me very happy.
So whenever I said, I'm 30, he's like, what? I thought you were 24 or 25 max. And thank you. That's pretty, really? But what I was going to say is that for me, it was a strange reverse because, for example, we would talk about an anime, right? Maybe I suppose if you look at me, it may not be clear or obvious that whatever you want to call it. I don't want to call it weeb because I don't think I'm weeb, but that's another episode. Weeb is someone who's super into Japan and only talks about Japan. But I really like animes, right? For example, Dragon Ball and this and that. So whenever we would see something there, some of the Japanese students, for example, or some of the other students on the trip, they would tell me this and I'll be like, oh yeah, this anime, blah, 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 blah. And then it's like, oh, I didn't think you like anime, or you don't look like someone who watches anime. Or I would get those types of comments, or, oh, but you are 30. I didn't think that you would like this. Or oh, you know this band. I thought you would like older bands. Or, I would get a bit of that. But it was a different way to connect and click with others. So for me, it was just because I'm 30 doesn't mean that I like this or that. And for them, it was very, I don't know, maybe reassuring could be a good way to put it. And as those moments happen, or as we got more of that, then eventually we would talk more and more. And I think it happened both ways. Because it's oh, look, we've got more in common than we think to. So it's not oh, yeah, I could be 10 years older than you, but we like the same stuff. And I think it goes back to what you were saying. You could have someone younger than you that could be better than you in Japanese or more proficient, however you want to put it, but you're still in a field that both of you like. So that's also pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. I had a similar thought actually a few times on the trip. I'm not massively into anime, probably not as much as you are, but I do have a few that I really like, and one of them is Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is from 1995. I'm pretty sure. That's older than me. That's older than everyone we were traveling with, basically. And I had this prejudiced thought in my head, anime is kind of cringe or whatever, which is not really what I believe, but there's a certain stereotype of, especially a white Westerner who goes to Japan. It's oh, so you really like anime? And I'm no, it's not like that, right? So it's I'm not really gonna open conversations by talking about anime. I'll talk about something that I probably actually enjoy a little bit more, or I might be able to have more interesting conversations with. We could talk about movies or music or whatever else. So then meeting a bunch of people who were oh, you're 18 and you also like this show that's 27, 28 years old now. It's oh, I kind of didn't think you'd be into that. I thought I was the boomer grandpa in this situation for liking this thing that was so old. And then it's oh, I'm meeting someone who's really young. And they also like it. It's oh, that's so sick. It's we have something to bond over now. And it was again, it was I needed to open my eyes, broaden my horizons, and be open to the possibility that someone would like this thing.
No, that's great. And look, the other thing, it's so cool because that also happened to me, but the reverse, I didn't tell you that. So the reverse for me was the opposite. Without praising myself too much, but I would have other people either in the trip or even the Japanese students telling me, oh, but your Japanese isn't great. But a part of me would be mate, I started 8 years ago, and despite maybe not going formally to classes, this and that, it's been a lot of self-study. So there is a lot that you can do. I think there is this quote, is something you can you underestimate what you do in a year, right? So, I've done it for, 8, and it's not always in my free time, but whenever I've got free time, I would study, get books and this and that. So that's always what I would tell them. It's like, imagine if you keep doing whatever you have been doing up to this point, when you're 25 or when you're my age, you'll be also quite proficient. And I think that's very promising. And it was also a humbling way of being, not like, oh yeah, I'm so good, blah, 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 but rather, and I guess this could apply to any sport, right? It's like if you play the guitar, and I started playing the guitar 2 years ago, and you've been playing it for 10, there are gonna be some differences, right? And probably anyone would notice. And for you to come and just, look down on me or say something like, oh yeah, but I'm much better than you, it's like, mate, of course, you've been doing it for way longer.
Yeah, for sure.
So I always thought of, whenever I received a compliment, a part of me was like, look, but it's not just, that's a different episode where people telling me like, oh, the language gene, or, oh, you just look. And it's like, well, yes, no, that's another episode. But what I would say is I was always very conscious of that. It's like, it's not just that I'm good. I've been doing this for so long, or like for, in this case, 8 years. So I suppose it makes sense that I could be good.
Yeah.
But I don't want to let that get into my head too much, because then, I don't know. And that's also not how I am, by the way. Peers can tell you.
To be honest, yeah, you are good. And that's because you've studied really hard, right? And like even on this study tour, like it's a study tour, we were there to study, but we were also there to have a really good time. Like it was a study tour, but it was actually, we're going to go to Japan and drink beers every night and get a high distinction, was kind of the vibe for some people on the trip. But Emilio, like, had his textbook every day. Like, you studied basically every day that you were in Japan. And it was like, you still had a really good time, obviously. But like, you were very, very diligent. And it was very inspiring, right? So, kind of related to your earlier question, like, why did I go to uni? I remember seeing this thing, and it's really weird what sticks with you and what doesn't. But it was just like someone in a similar position to me, sort of like deliberating over like whether they go back to study, or it could be for anything really. But this person was like, do I really want to be 30 when I graduate? And their friend is like, well, you're going to be 30 anyway. Like, ooh, you might as well get the degree if you want to get the degree. Or it's like, you're going to be 30 anyway. You might as well study Japanese in the meantime. You might as well pursue your hobby. You might as well pursue your sport or your instrument or whatever it is. Like, the time is going to pass. That's like the only certainty we have. It's like, time will pass, the days will keep going on, and you will keep improving at whatever it is you're doing. And like, the worst thing you can do is like be paralyzed by choice or decision paralysis, indecision, that sort of thing. So if you want to do something, then you need to do something.
And I guess say for example, in your situation, like, I suppose a part of you could think, or maybe you could have thought, oh wait, but I'm 25, 26, all these guys are like 18, I'm way older than all of them. What if people tell me, oh, but you are too old, blah, blah, blah. But then going back to what you said, but you're going to be old anyways.
That's right.
Or if you hadn't started now, if you were to do it in a year's or 2 years' time, it would aggravate more. So,
yeah.
So I guess going back into that point, it's like, you might as well just do it, right?
Yeah, it was like, I actually can't get any younger. I have to accept the fact that like, I'm going to be hanging out with people that are a little bit younger than me. And like, that's okay. Like, it's confronting at first. But then if you get over it, you can have fun.
True. And I will also say that, with hanging out with people younger than you, interesting things happen. One is what we said about finding out we've got so much in common, despite the age gap. But, obviously the conversations may change because we are not 18 or 19.
Yeah.
In the sense that, obviously we've had that stage, but then what I've noticed is that sometimes, and look, I swear, peers, guys, everyone, this I didn't go out of my way for this, but I would be talking to someone, and then out of the blue, some of our classmates, people in Japan are like, Emilio, I want to ask you a question. What do you think about blah, 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 blah? Or what do you think about this scenario? And I would be like, that's a really good question. And then I'm like, why me? And he's like, well, it's like, you've got a bit more experience. You're very approachable. You're 30, maybe this has happened to you before. So you could, get different things from different conversations. And it may not necessarily be like that awkward thing of like, oh, you're older than me, blah, blah, blah. But rather, you could even help out someone without noticing that you could.
Yeah, I hope so. Did you enjoy getting those questions? Because I definitely asked you a few questions like
Yeah,
that.
look, it was really cool. It was so strange because sometimes whenever I answered, a part of me was like, oh my God, I feel like Master Yoda. And for those of you who don't know, Master Yoda, he's like 90, hanging out with like, I don't know,
he's
20.
shriveled up,
So a part of me was like, this is crazy. I mean, it was a good experience in the sense that, I mean, sometimes when you go to those trips or those experiences, I mean, a part of me thought, oh, they're just not being nice to me. And that was such a big thing. And I think because of those conversations and because of those experiences, we got, not just me, I think we all got so much from the study tour. Like you said, it's not just going to study. Obviously, the study is important, but on top of that, so many other cool things happened. And I'm really grateful that that happened.
Yeah,
And
same.
I have to also say something about the study tour because we touch upon it a lot. And talking about our age, I remember that, I mean, it wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to go to Japan and I apply. Interestingly enough, I got an email saying, oh, master students can also go to this trip. I didn't even read the email. I just read study tour, Japan, 2 weeks. And I said, I'm applying. I'm going. And then, after applying, I got an email saying, oh, Emilio-san, could you please come for an interview? And I thought, ooh, okay, cool. Let's do it. And in the interview, at some point, I was told, I think you would enjoy the program, but I'm also a bit worried. And I thought, what is it? Is it my Japanese not being enough? Or you know where I'm going with this, please? You know where I'm going? And I was, a bit worried, nervous, I had 2 teachers interviewing me. And then it's like, look, Emilio, you are a bit older than other students. And a part of me is like, nah, I'm going to be okay. I never thought about age being a problem. And then during the trip, like these little things we're talking about, all these differences would come up. And then now a part of me after the trip is like, now I understand why I was asked if I was going to be okay. But yeah, it was just so interesting, or like having that perspective of, are you going to be okay in the trip? And at the time I was like, I just want to go to Japan. I didn't understand why I was being asked that.
I was asked the same thing. The exact wording of the question was, how do you feel about being more mature than the other students?
Oh, okay.
And the teacher who was interviewing me for the study tour, she actually asked this question like 3 separate times in this like pretty short interview. It's like she was really driving the point home. She was like, you're old. And I was like, oh my God, I am old. And there's a little difference between like uni culture in Japan and in Australia. Because like in Japan, all the first years were like 18, 19. Whereas in Australia, a lot of people do a gap year, or a lot of people like start uni like in their early 20s, that sort of thing. So I was like, oh, I guess I am going to be like a little bit more mature, for lack of a better word. A little bit older than some people there, right? But I'd already gotten over that when I started uni in the first place. I was like, I don't want to be older than everyone. And then I went to my first class in Australia and like did my first, week and made friends. And I was like, it's not that bad. So I'd already come to terms with it and I'd already gotten over it. And then she's like, are you worried about this? And I said, well, I wasn't, but now I am. And then I was worried. I was worried the entire time from the interview until we left. And my worries disappeared when I met you at the Taiwan International Airport. I was like, it's fine. It's going to be so chill.
It's okay. There is someone older than me.
No,
not my problem anymore.
Not like that. It was more like, Emilio, like the age gap from me to you is similar to the age gap from, the average person on the study tour.
I don't know how to take that, PS.
I'm just saying in pure numbers, purely based on numbers, it's a similar age gap. And I was like, well, I don't care. Like, we're going to be great friends. And we became quite good friends, I would say. And it's like, if there's no issue with this, then there's no issue with it going the other direction. There's no issue with me, being more mature than the other people on the study tour.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah.
Because look, a part of me thought, I was just very open to meeting them. And I remember saying in the interview something along the lines of, but I'm a teacher and I think I get along well with my students. So, it should be okay. Now that it happened, it's not quite the same. Obviously I do get along with them, but it's different because now I'm also the student. But more than that, I remember after we met, a part of me thought, look, worst case scenario, if I don't get along, if I don't fit in a group, I would at least talk to PS, because PS is, one of the closest ones to me. And it's interesting you put that, I mean, as in that you mentioned it, because we had, similar thoughts.
Yeah, and then I think we had a similar experience because I felt the same. I'm like, oh, yeah, at least I'll have Emilio. And then like the actual study tour began, and I was like, I don't need Emilio, Like I was like, I'm glad I have this guy, but it's like I don't need to rely on the fact
exactly.
that we're both a little bit older.
Yeah, and I mean having that, not having that extra pressure of like, oh, I'm not gonna fit here or this or that. It was so. I think it's such a mental thing. I'll say something in the podcast or like to everyone. We had to do some entries, right? And we had to basically write a diary in Japanese. It could be as simple as you want it to be or as complicated as you want it to be. And one of my entries, I think it was the first one, and that's when I had to have a chat with the teacher. I don't even know if I've told you this. Here we go. I basically told her, like, I'm going crazy because I'm always studying. No one is studying, and I understand why they're not studying, but I've got this huge goal, and I know how away I'm from the goal. It's like I need to learn, I don't know, I don't even know how to put it in words, but it's, let's say, easily, I don't know, 10 textbooks. And I'm halfway through 3. I've got a test in a month. And these guys are talking about holidays and this and that. And back then I was thinking of saving money to pay my next semester. And she's like, yeah, Emilio, I understand. And then a part of me thought, oh, damn, this age thing really hit me. And then I would be telling you guys, as you mentioned, it's like, no, wait, I need to study. Wait, I need to do a bit of work. Or I would be on the study tour and I know that other teachers would be covering me and I already knew my students. And then I know they would be struggling. So it was such a strange position because it's like, I'll be back in a bit. But I also wanted to just stay, but I knew I had to go back, reply to some messages. And yeah, that was so interesting. But then I remember telling my teacher, in that mini interview, I just said to her, but you know what? After I talked to her, I thought, no, it's okay. Maybe it's all on my head the whole time. Or after a few interactions, I said, look, maybe I'm overthinking this. And then slowly, all these interactions happened. And then I just went back to her like maybe 1 or 2 days later being, hey, look, maybe, I don't know if it's me overreacting or now that I had more time to think about this conversation, I feel like maybe it's not as bad as I thought. And now I know I'm here. I know I'm different. I understand we all have different goals. I'm just going to get the most from this experience. And then basically I said, maybe this is going to be my diary number 1. And it was. And it was the longest one, by the way.
That's awesome. I really liked that diary assessment because it was a really good way to make everyone reflect, to actually make sure people were getting something out of this experience rather than like just a holiday. Sorry, excuse me. Getting over the flu. It's pretty nasty. It was like, we can all reflect on the experience that we're having, and as a result, like we're gonna grow more from it. And yeah, like you say, obviously, when you have a job like you're teaching, and you're studying for the JLPT, which I think was 2 weeks after we got back from Japan. Like it was very, very shortly after, and that's obviously like a massive test and a massive deal. And you're hanging out with a bunch of, let's face it, like early 20s larrikins from Australia who just want to have a good time. That's like, it's like that peer pressure, It's like being 18 again, and your friends are like, come on, come out, and you're like, oh no, man, I've got to study. Like this is really important. It's like, yeah, that is really important. And like, I guess your priorities must have shifted as you've gotten a little bit older.
Yeah, slowly, things change. And I guess it's all about appreciating the change and just,
Yeah. Well, let me be the first to say, I'm sorry if we made you party too hard and have too much fun in Japan.
Oh, no.
But I think it was worth it, and I hope that you still like feel good about the way that you juggle. Like, actually, I should just ask you, do you feel like you struck the right balance? Like, did you?
100%. Looking back, I think, obviously, as I guess this is like me being tough on myself, it's like, yeah, I could have studied more, of course. But on the flip side, I think it was really good balance, and it wasn't great. Obviously, very cliche, but I probably wouldn't change anything because as it is, I got so much from it, good and bad, embarrassing moments or aha moments, not so aha moments, but it was just great, all in all. And I would also take this opportunity to say, and I'm sure you will agree, that I would highly encourage anyone to give it a try. And if this is an opportunity, if you could have a go and maybe apply to any of these programs, do it. That's also a big shock. I mean, because I was the only non-Australian of the group, as in born here. Because I think
Is that true?
I think so. I mean, there were only 2 non-Australians out of 11, right? Because one of them, he didn't grow up here, but he did. So I think he did high school. I mean, up to high school in his country, and then just like me.
Yeah.
But he had a connection with Australia. Maybe that's why, I was just picking me or to make me extra special on the spot. But I guess that's also something that brought some perspective to me, because a part of me thought, wow, I mean, obviously that program may not apply to many of the listeners or people that are checking this out, but I would say within your program, there may be something and you will never know if you don't apply or like if you don't check. I used to think, oh man, there is no way I'm gonna get accepted. And this is back then. This is not with this program. It was with my first study abroad. I was like, I'm not Australian. English is not my first language. I mean, there is no way I would get accepted. I mean, I knew my grades were good, not high distinctions all the way, but I thought it's gonna be so hard. I'm competing against you guys. There's no way. And then to my surprise, I think, not many people applied, and the program manager really liked me and my story. So you just never know what's going to happen. So I would take this as an opportunity to encourage anyone that has the chance to do any form of program placement to just apply and go for it, because you just never know. And I think not that many people apply.
I think, yeah, generally that's probably true. Like, you shouldn't sell yourself short. Like, you probably got in because you deserved it, right? But at the same time, maybe there are spots and maybe not that many people apply, and maybe you've actually got like a way better chance to get in than you realize. Like, it's not like entering a giveaway or like a raffle or something like that, where you're like, oh, what if I win this one? And then it's like, actually so many people are in this draw that you're never going to win. It's like actually committing to like a study abroad or a semester exchange is like a big commitment. And as a result, a lot of people would have like their own reservations about like applying for something like that. And it's a real shame, because I think that if there's one like lesson to be learned from like our recent experience, is that's like you definitely need to take these opportunities if they come up. You should go before you don't. And also just like general advice, like if you're traveling somewhere, just learn how to say please and thank you, and then like it goes a long way. Just like having like the very basics, you have that down, and like suddenly people are way more open to like having a connection with you. And I think that's really special.
Talking about special things, you have touched up on so many interesting things. And obviously, all in all, we could say that at the end of the day, going back to uni or doing that thing that you wanted to do, despite your age, is quite a thing, because like you said, you cannot go back in time. So you might as well do anything that you may be interested in doing. And now, look, I would love to keep going, but we're getting very close to the end. I'm going to put you on the spot with our listeners, with everyone here.
Yep.
We've talked about so much, Piers. It's been an amazing episode, but I have to ask you, now that the spotlight is on you, what would be your final message? What would you like to share with our audience? Young, not so young, old, maybe very old, I don't know.
I think take whatever opportunities are presented to you. Travel when you can. Be open to meeting people. Be open to like meeting people with like different perspectives too. Because that's like when you do the most learning. That's when you have the most growth. Don't be afraid of going to uni as well. If you're a bit older, if you're like me and you're like apprehensive about it because of your age, like just do it. It's kind of not a big deal. And like I said, you're going to be 30 regardless, or you're going to be 40 regardless, or you're going to be 50 one day. And that's just like unavoidable. So all you can do is the best with like the circumstances that you have right now. And like the best time to start anything is right now. My final piece of advice, wear sunscreen in winter.
There we go. Thank you. And look, Piers, like I said, it's been an amazing episode. Obviously, thank you so much for joining us. And obviously, thank you for, checking us out. If you're on YouTube, thank you for watching the video. Also, thank you for the like and the subscribe. If you're on Spotify, also thank you for your review. Thank you for letting us be part of your day. We were part of your day. You were part of our day. Maybe some people listen to us on their commute or cleaning or running. I don't know. I always get different, I listen to you while I'm working. I listen to you while I'm cleaning, this or that. So once again, thank you. I'm humbled by that. It's been an amazing episode. We may see Piers again because I'm sure that if I like this interview, I'm sure you did too. And Piers, maybe we may see you back in the future.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love that. It's very special to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. And well, just before we wrap up, there is a chance that we may see Piers in social media. Now I'm putting you on the spot again. So just to wrap up, if anyone wants to get in touch, or maybe you can talk about your next projects.
Yeah, look, if you're seeing this on Instagram or YouTube, you can find me on Instagram. Piers Purcell is my name. Maybe TikTok to come soon. I have a lot of video projects that are in like the incubation phase. Like it's written, it's filmed, it just needs to be edited now. So stay tuned. But yeah, Instagram, YouTube, find me.
Awesome, Piers. Well, look, this was episode 81. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. I already said it. This was episode 81. Miss me. Don't miss me too much. I'll see you probably next week or in 2 weeks because it is Christmas time. Happy New Year. Merry Christmas. Happy birthday. Happy everything. Big hug to all of you. Big hug to you, Piers. And, well, I'll see you on the next episode. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
Happy holidays. Bye for now.